Okay, good evening, Rabotai. We're going to have a continuation, a second session, so to speak, to the topic of Lashon Harah that we started in previous talks. This time, really, I want to discuss some of the modern applications of when to and when not to speak Lashon Harah, but with more of an emphasis on when a person is allowed really to speak Lashon Harah, and then maybe even more of an obligation to actually disclose information that one possesses. Now, the truth is, we spoke about how our Chachamim in the Gemara, in the Zohar, they, in a very vivid and horrifying way, they tell us how horrible Lashon Harah is. All the Gemarot, that the person Yachred Hashem Siftech Halakot Lashon Medaberet Kedolot. David HaMelech says Hashem is going to Chas v'Shalom cut off a person from Olam Haba if a person speaks Lashon Harah. The Gemara says in the name of Mor Ukba, in the name of his Rabbi Shmuel, the Gemara in Erachin on page 16 says a person that speaks Lashon Harah, Hashem says me and him cannot live in the same world, so to speak. Hashem, who says I am shochen itam betoch tumotam, I tolerate any of the sins of the Jewish nation. When it gets to Lashon Harah, Hashem says, me and him cannot live in the same place. This is one not tolerated sin that Hashem says, this one makes me go out of the picture. And at the same time, the Gemara says in Makot on page 23 that a person that speaks Lashon Harah, ra'ui lashlicho leklavim. It's fit to throw him to the dogs, which obviously the Rivash writes, one of the major medieval authorities of Halakha, he writes, doesn't mean the next time if someone said Lashon Harah, you tie him up and you send him to your German Shepherd. It means that it's so severe that he's becoming even lower, chas v'shalom, than animals, because as the Ben Ishchai writes in Ben Yehoyada, even dogs knew how to control their mouth when he got to the salvation of the Jewish nation, Am Yisrael, not to bark when the Jewish people were going out, although they were trained to bark and trained to alarm the owners of someone escaping. This was a public event and none of them really made noise. So a person that does not know how to control his mouth and when to speak, when not, perhaps is becoming even worse than that. And he said, Zohar HaKadosh in Parashat Mesorah writes in Zohar Yudalet that the person that speaks Lashon Harah, his tefillah is not accepted. We all try so hard to look for sigulot, what to do that tefillot are tefillot, things that we need for health, for parnasah, for shidduchim, should go up. And here is an explicit Zohar. It says, you want your tefillot to go up? Watch the mouth, because if your mouth is kept holy without any avon of Lashon Harah, then the tefillah goes straight up. But the tefillah of a person that's coming from a vessel, from a mouth that spoke Lashon Harah, Zohar says, perhaps is not accepted. And above all, we mentioned that Sefer Hasidim, this is very heavily supported by Jewish literature of the olden. This is the early medieval authorities of Halakha. In Sefer Hasidim, it's brought in the Musar Sfarim as well. For instance, it's brought in Orchot Tzadikim, in Sha'ar Anava. Maran Bet Yosef, in the book that he wrote, Maran, Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of Shulchan Aruch, he had a private angel, Malach, that used to learn with him, teach him Torah and Kabbalah specifically. And he codified anything that he learned from the Malach in a book called Magid Mesharim. So in Magid Mesharim, Maran writes that the Malach told him the same thing. This is all three of them say the exact same thing. So this is very heavily supported from the Jewish literature, that a person that speaks Lashon Harah, Hashem takes his schar, his mitzvot, and gives it to the person who he spoke of in a negative way, and takes the person's averot. If Reuben speaks about Shimon, Hashem takes the mitzvot of Reuben, gives it to Shimon, and takes the averot of Shimon and gives it to Reuben. So after 120, you go up there, and there's all the list of things, the negative things you did. And you say, it's a mistake in the computers, I've never done this. I say, no, you spoke Lashon Harah and Shimon. That's how you got it. And the whole list of mitzvot is missing because they were given to other people. And we explained Al Pi Kabbalah how this exactly works. But this is pretty scary. Chazal did a great job of really scaring us off in a real way, that now we don't want to talk anything. We don't want to talk at all. Now the question is there any scenario that Lashon Harah would be mutar? And learning about Lashon Harah itself is really very important as well. You see, any other mitzvah that you learn, so you're doing a mitzvah of Talmud Torah. When you go to a shi'ur, you're doing a mitzvah of Talmud Torah. When you learn about Lashon Harah, aside from doing mitzvah of Talmud Torah, writes the Ramban on Parashat Ki Tetzeh, you're doing two mitzvot. You're learning Torah, but you're also doing a positive mitzvah, commandment of Zachirat Maaseh Miriam. This Ramban writes on Parashat Amalek, basically, there's a mitzvah to remember every day what Amalek did, and there's a mitzvah to remember every day what happened to Miriam when Miriam said Lashon Harah about her brother Moshe Rabbeinu. So says Ramban, every time you learn about Lashon Harah, you're doing this positive mitzvah of the Torah to remember what happened to Miriam HaNeviah. So it's important tonight to discuss some of the laws, rules, and regulations of Lashon Harah. And unlike other mitzvot, in Orach Chaim and Yoreh De'ah, in regular halachot, whenever we have doubt, if you're a God-fearing individual, what do you say? You have doubt, you do without. We'll just be stringent. Won't do it. If it's a questionable thing, I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to be mahmir. Ha-mahmir tavo ala bracha. Anyone that's more mahmir, more stringent, he'll be blessed. In Lashon Harah, you can't really say that. You have to exactly know what the halacha is. Because as we're going to see, when it comes to issues of Lashon Harah le'to'elet, that you have to say Lashon Harah, you have to speak perhaps even negatively when it's to the benefit, the crucial benefit of other people, that becomes really an obligatory thing. You can't say, well, I am not sure if this is mutar, asur, so I'm just not going to say anything. And let the third party's life be ruined just because you were misupak, you were doubtful as to whether or not you could speak. So it's very important. This is one of those subjects that a person has to be very up to date and very much informed and educated to know what you could say and what you can't say. Because whatever you could say, you should say. And whatever you can't say, absolutely is asur. And the truth is, this is mentioned in Sefer Pitchet Shuvah and Orach Chaim in Siman Kuf Nun Vav. He says, Kvar hirishu sifrei musar bedivrehem. Already all of the halachic and ethical books of the Jewish literature have shaken up the world with their words in how horrible and important it is not to speak Lashon Harah. It's horrible to speak Lashon Harah. All of the Sifrei Musar are filled with the severity of speaking Lashon Harah. And then he adds, he says, Ve'ani mar'ish et ha'olam. I do the opposite, he writes. I am going to shake up the world on the fact that many people do not speak Lashon Harah when they must really be opening their mouth and offering information that could change other people's lives. And he says, I'll give you an example. If you see somebody is waiting with a loaded gun on the corner behind the curve, and he wants to shoot someone that's walking, he's going to get there in 5 minutes. You're seeing this. You have the guy's number. You could call him and say, don't go, change your path. And you just sit idly by, do nothing. Or you see someone is making a tunnel to go to someone's treasure and empty out his life's work. And you just sit by and say, it's not my business. Why should I say anything? He said, how would we feel about people like that, he says. Wouldn't we say that this is horrible? Of course we would. So what's the difference if you see someone's secretary stealing from him? Or if he's getting into a loan with someone that you know he's not going to pay him. You know the person that's trying to borrow money from him. You know he's basically equivalent of losing his money. Or he's getting into a partnership with someone that's going to really strip him off of anything that he has, or he's getting into a shidduch relationship of marriage that you know the person is psychologically not well and he's going to have a miserable life, and you just sit by idly and don't say anything, don't offer any information. He says that's a horrible midah in someone's life. Without doing anything, but just by sitting idly by and watching this happen and the history unfold itself. Really, there's the mitzvah in the Torah. The Torah says, Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. Do not stand idly by and watch your brother's blood being spilled. If someone is in the river, in the sea, and they can't swim, they're drowning, and you just say, well, I'm not doing anything negative, but you are basically, the Torah says that you have killed this person, although you didn't do anything, but the Torah puts his blood on your neck. You're responsible for the loss of life that was done by you sitting idly by and not doing anything. So the same really applies to this as well. That's a very interesting Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin that a person is even obligated to spend money and time and effort to be mekayem, to establish this positive, this negative mitzvah of lo ta'amud al dam re'echa, of not standing by watching someone go down the drain. You not only have to do it, you have to offer time and money in order to do this mitzvah of lo ta'amud al dam re'echa. And when it comes to Lashon Harah, it says Shela Kadosh is the same exact thing. When you could offer information that would save life or save someone from agony or loss of money, that obviously is something important that the person has to really bear in mind when it's important for you to inform others about the potential dangers that are awaiting them, perhaps emotionally, socially, financially, and on. You know, Rav Sharia de Blisky, he once said, one of the Gedolim in Eretz Israel, he said that for 60 years he hasn't spoken a word of Lashon Harah. So one of his students surprisingly asked, he said, wasn't it hard? He said, you know, the truth is, once you get the hang of it, it's not so difficult. Not to speak ill about other people, it's not so difficult. In the beginning, maybe it's a challenge. Once you get the hang of it and you get used to watching what you say, it's pretty easy. But you say, you know what's the hard part? The hard part is when you have to speak Lashon Harah, what to say and when to speak and when to offer and how much and to whom, that really becomes the bigger challenge. And this is what really we want to speak tonight about. Because I believe one of the greatest challenges of this generation is that we've got it backwards. It's ironic, but we've got it backwards. We freely speak Lashon Harah, hopefully not anyone in this large room, but we freely speak Lashon Harah when it's small stuff. You know, daily, day-to-day, mundane things we speak. Yeah, he said this, did you hear what happened to him? When it comes to bigger things that we sense this may make a difference in someone's life, all of a sudden we become very nervous. We don't want to talk. We become hesitant. Oh, I may be affecting someone's partnership, someone's shidduch, someone's buying a house, someone's neighborhood. I'm not going to speak. Which is exactly the opposite of the real halacha. The little stuff, there is no heter to speak about them in a negative way. When it comes to the bigger things that could actually change and affect a person's life, that's when a person must speak up. If it's going to negatively change someone's life, obviously a person has to speak up. And really, on the hearing side, on the hearing end of it, the person that's hearing the Lashon Harah also halachically makes a difference. Normally speaking, when someone comes and tells you Lashon Harah, you have to reject it. You say, I'm not interested to listen to Lashon Harah. And obviously, it's not mutar to believe it. But when it's something that could change your life, someone says, look, the person you're entering a business deal with, he is a charlatan. He's not an honest person. So obviously it's asur to believe it. But the Gemara says, Hai lishna bisha. This Lashon Harah, although we say it's asur to accept it, lekabuli, aval lemechash mihabai. But you have to be worried about it. You have to consider it as a concern in the back of your mind. And the Gemara says the famous story of Gedaliah ben Achikam. Right after the day after Rosh Hashanah, we all fast. Tanit Tzom Gedaliah. What's Tzom Gedaliah? Because Gedaliah ben Achikam was Gacheled and Nishara after the Galut. Nebuchadnezzar left Gedaliah as the leader of the Jewish community in Eretz Israel, and people of the neighboring countries wanted to knock down this last straw of the Jewish community. So they sent, the Melech Amon sent a messenger to quote unquote respect him and greet him, a Jewish fellow called Ishmael, surprisingly. And Gedaliah was planning to respect him in kavod melachim, to respect him in a tremendous way. And people came and told Gedaliah, you should be aware, you should be wary that this guy is actually coming to kill you. It is not as good as it sounds. And he said, Chas v'shalom. He quieted them down. He says, you're saying Lashon Harah on a Jew? I'm not listening to your Lashon Harah. I'm not accepting your Lashon Harah. Forget about it. Get out of my palace. And that's exactly what happened at night when they had the party. This guy Ishmael and all of his fellows, they got up, they killed Gedaliah, they killed all of his people, and this was basically this was the end of the last leftover straw of the Jewish population after the exile in Eretz Israel, and that's why we fast, because he did not want to take seriously a quote-unquote Lashon Harah that was told to him for to'ilet, for benefit, and he didn't take it seriously enough. So therefore, it's really important to note that there is a whole topic, aside from the Isur of Lashon Harah, there is another Isur of not speaking Lashon Harah when a person really has to speak. Now, Chafetz Chaim counts up 7 different conditions, which makes it very complex, that if you want to say Lashon Harah, for it to be considered Lashon Harah To'elet, for it to be considered a Lashon Harah that's for constructive and beneficial purposes, you need to have a whole checklist basically of things, of situations, and build up a scenario that's considered really the toilet. First and foremost, you have to really know your stuff. If you heard on a Lashon Harah blog that someone wants to do something, and then you call up everyone and tell them about it, that's not toilet. Even if it is for toilet, but you don't know really if this stuff is true, if you don't know the information to be true firsthand, really that's more difficult. You have to have a sense of being somewhat sure that this is fully emet and true in order for you to say it. And it should be no other way to relay the information. Obviously, it should be with a pure heart. For instance, it is a machloket really, although Chafetz Chaim says it as a halacha, but it's really a machloket. The Sema, Sefer Meirat Einayim, and Choshen Mishpat, he's the primary commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, the last chelek, the monetary laws of Choshen Mishpat. And in Siman Tav Chav Aleph 421, he writes in Sifkatan Chav Zayin, he says, let's say, there is a halacha. If you see Reuben is beating up Shimon, and Shimon is the victim, he can't protect himself, and you're a strong, muscle-bound fellow, so you could go and beat up Reuben to save Shimon. The halacha is, you have to separate them, you have to save the victim from the assault, and even if it takes beating for Reuben to separate him from Shimon, you have to do it. You have to beat him up to save the victim. That's the halacha. So says the Sema, what if you hate Reuben? You have a personal account, personal animosity towards Reuben, and had it been anyone else, you wouldn't act on it. You would just go to your business. But because Reuben, the one that you hate, is beating up, so I remember Shulchan Aruch Tav Chaf Aleph, so I'm going to beat him up. So says the Sema, Asur, you can't do it because you're doing a personal revenge. You're doing a personal thing. It's not mutar. So would follow that if you want to say Lashon Harah to save someone else, but when you're saying it, you're melting from happiness inside because you hate the guy that you're saying Lashon Harah on anyways. You say, oh, now I have a kasher lemehadrin, Bet Yosef, Badatz, hechsher on the Lashon Harah that I'm going to say, because this guy is ruining his life. The Sma would tell you should not say the Lashon Harah. And so says Chafetz Chaim. But the truth is, the Taz, the Turei Zahav, disagrees with Sma. He says, I don't understand the logic. You're saving someone's life. So you need to learn some musar. Okay, you're not doing the best thing because you're doing it as a personal getting back at him and revenge and so on and so forth. It's feelings of animosity surfacing up. That's not a positive thing. But nevertheless, it doesn't make it asur for you to save a fellow. So he disagrees with this. And I've proofs from other great achronim like Erech Shai and others that they also feel like the Taz. So therefore, halakha le'maaseh, even if you are not the best, doing it with the best of intentions, still is mutar. But obviously that's a downgrade on the person that needs really to work on his ethics and on his personality, character, of not doing it because of animosity. Chafetz Chaim says it's asur to do that. You have to want the best of the fellow, of the guy that you're speaking about. So that's something that's important to have in mind. Now I want to speak a few minutes about the perhaps most hot topic of shidduchim when he gets to speaking Lashon Harah. About shidduchim, we hear people who are dating and you're on the reference call, or you're their neighbor, or used to be their classmate, roommate, or any other capacity of friendship, and people call you for reference. How do you view this guy? What do you have to say? Give me a general profile about this person, this girl, this boy. What do you have to say? When is it mutar and when is it asur to speak Lashon Harah? And this actually has extra importance because there's a sugya, there's a halacha when it comes to marriage of kiddushe ta'ut. That means if there was a significant information that was withheld, a blemish in the chatan or the kala, and this was concealed and kept away from the other spouse, and the marriage happened, and subsequent to that you realize this guy is totally not the personality I thought, I would have never ever given into this marriage had I known this information. That kiddushin, that marriage was not valid. They're not married halachically. Even with all the ketuvah and a $100,000 wedding or whatever you had, still halachically they're not married. Chas v'shalom, asa kol beilotav beilat zinut. They've been living with each other like zinut. So therefore, if you are concealing and keeping away information that are very crucial, that objectively people would not want to marry someone with those conditions and situations, aside from the Yisur of Lashon Harah, you're really dealing with a scenario that a person could really not be married. The Sefer Hasidim writes, this is again one of the main medieval authorities of Musar and Halacha. He's followed by the multitudes of Jews, perhaps even more than the Torah. There's a joke that they say if Sefer Hasidim would write the Aseret HaDibrot, everyone would keep Aseret HaDibrot. Anything that he wrote was taken so seriously across the board by the communities of Sfaradim, Ashkenazim, Hasidim, and all of them. And he writes in Siman Tafkuf Zayin of Sefer Hasidim, says, Le'olam al yechaseh adam mum b'nei beto. You should never conceal and cover the blemishes that your family has. When it comes to shidduchim, if there's something major, you should say it yourself. If your daughter, your son, yourself, you have something that's major and it needs to be known, you should say it prior to the wedding. Shema yomru kiddushe ta'udhem, because lest people are going to say that this was a marriage based on flaw, and therefore the marriage is not a marriage. We don't want to get to that sticky situation of putting a question mark on a wedding. So therefore it's important to really be open and to some extent be educated of what things are mutar, what is considered a blemish in shidduchim, as we're going to discuss some of the major things. And this is something that you hear horror stories, literally horror stories that happen under our nose in the religious community, which shows really and points to the ignorance, the level of us being uneducated in this issue. For instance, we had a case heard from Rabbi Yamin Cohen Shlita when he visited here. A fellow calls him discussing a certain surgical operation on the reproductive system, and in the back and forth of the discussion, he says, "So what does your wife say about this?" And he says, "My wife doesn't know nothing about this issue that I have." So it comes out that this guy married a woman that desperately wanted to have a child. She was already 40 years old, and she gave in to marrying him because her window was closing. And he knew already that under regular, normal circumstances, he cannot have a child. And he concealed this information from her, marrying without telling her that he has this condition. And he started privately, secretly going to see physicians and getting treatment. And 2 years later, here he is calling to ask a halachic question about a surgical operation that he may or may not go through. This is a horror story. This is playing with someone's life without telling them. This is just rish'ut. This is being a rasha. Yeah, the case that a fellow had MS. Let's keep the questions with it. A fellow had MS, and it was in early stages, so he was on medication, and people wouldn't know about it. When he got married to this woman, they had a bunch of kids, and then it became more and more advanced. Obviously, it's an elephant in the room. You can't conceal this information forever. He had MS. And as soon as she figured out, she wanted out, this became one of the messiest divorces of the decade. Because one of the fathers was a very prominent lawyer, and he used all of his connections and power to ruin the other person's life. It became totally a mess. And this is because something that had to be concealed, something had to be put out and explained and discussed, was concealed and was hidden until after the marriage. And again, you hear stories about even halachic rulings that are totally off the chart. For instance, this is something that bothers me personally. There was a boy that had very strong desire and tendency to homosexuality. He basically was a homosexual, and the quote-unquote Rav told him that as long as he could perform a marital relationship, and his mutar for him to not say anything and get into a marriage. This is, to me, a real question of the marriage being even valid at all. This is not something that could be concealed. It's not fair to a person to get into a marriage relationship with this type of a person under any circumstances. So those are things that are important to note. And again, these things do happen. These are all real life stories that we're discussing. And it's important to know, in the Ashkenazim, they have a text of Tenaim. Aside from the Ketuvah that they sign, there's a document of Tenaim, conditions of marriage that they sign. And in it, there's a beautiful, beautiful piece. It says, they promise each other, Shelo yavrichu v'al ya'alimu lo zu mizeh v'lo zeh mizu. They promise each other not to hide anything, not him from her and not her from him. And this is a basic breach in a marriage relationship. When you get into a relationship which is supposed to last a lifetime, and you are hiding and concealing things that are important. Okay, if you lost the game in your childhood, or you broke someone else's arm, or those things you don't have to say. But something that's going to change her life or his life when you get married, those things are important and have to be discussed in a very open and direct way. Now, sometimes a person wonders to himself, is it mutar for me to speak to my rabbi before I answer. I'm caught off guard. So etzah tova, a good advice is, whenever someone calls you, don't answer right away. Don't jump into answering negative or positive. Because oftentimes, you don't even know what they want to ask. For instance, I give you an example. Someone calls and says, I want the best Talmid Chacham, the biggest Talmid Chacham for my daughter. Now, the guy himself, the father of the girl, is totally ignorant. He doesn't even know Aleph Bet. So for him, the biggest Talmid Chacham means someone that could read the Torah in public and he will feel good about his son-in-law. You are thinking, meanwhile, that he wants to marry off his daughter to Chacham Obadiah, right? So totally you're not talking to each other. So the etzah tova, the advice is, speak to them for 5 minutes before you say anything. As soon as they mention the name, say, he's a good boy, a good girl, well, what's your name? Ask their name. Once they say their name, they're committed a little bit more. And say, so where do you live? Where do you go to shul? Where is your Bet Knesset? You get a feel after 4 or 5 minutes, and then you say, you know what? This is a wonderful family, but I have a meeting right now, I have to go. Can we make a meeting tomorrow night? Call me at 8:30, we'll speak over the phone or we could meet. Meanwhile, you bought yourself a day, you could go halachically see what you have to say, what you don't have to say. You go to the Hacham. And sometimes it's even mutar to disclose the identity of the person and what you know to the Rav in order to get etzah if it's need be. We see this, Chafetz Chaim says this from the Gemara in Ketuvot. The Gemara says in Daf Zayin, the Rav Anan, one of the Tanaim, he had a friend, a colleague of his, that in a halachic debate that they had, a letter that he sent him, he kind of belittled him. He said, Anan, midekarkayo midemtaltali. He called him Anan, like that, like he's speaking to someone lower. And he was hurt, his feeling was hurt. He wanted to know how to deal with this. So he went to more ukva, to his Rebbe, to the more prominent Rav of the community. He showed him the letter of what the fellow had written about him. So you see from here that he kind of like said Lashon Harah on this person, that look what he wrote about me. But this was needed for him to be educated how to deal with the situation at hand. So even sometimes in this, if it's important for the sake of discussion, for the detail of the information, if you need to disclose something in order to ask a proper she'elat chacham to know what to do halachically, that also the minimum that's needed, that would be mutar to disclose. Now sometimes a person tells you something and says, I want you to promise me to secrecy. You're not going to say this to anyone, right? Yes. Promise. And then 10 years later he wants to get married, and you know that he could never have a child, and he's not saying it to the girl. Can you say that? Can you pick up the phone? Do you have to pick up the phone? You promised him, you gave him your word that you're not going to say it to anyone, right? And now is the time that you need to know if it's mutar for me to pick up the phone. He is ruining her life. But I promised. So says Rabbi Yashiv, there's no problem. You could say it even though that you promised not to say, because this lo ta'amud al dam re'echa overrides the promise that you give. But however, says Rabbi Yashiv, if you swore to it or you gave a handshake, some people they take handshakes too lightly. Shcharuch says if you promise to someone to do something and you make a handshake on it, that's equivalent of swearing. That's like a shvu'ah. So therefore, you have to be careful not to, shake hands for no reason. And this is what Rabbi Yashiv says, that in this specific case, if you swear, he swore you to secrecy, then you cannot say it. Which is a chidush. I don't fully understand this, Rabbi Yashiv, because really, if you swear on something that's against what it says in the Torah, your shvu'ah is null and void. Right? You swear, I'm not going to sit in the sukkah. Right? And you swear on it. The Torah says you have to sit in the sukkah. You swear not to. The shvuah is as if it's not there. So here the Torah says, don't stand on your, lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. and you swore not to say it to someone. So Rabbi Yashiv has a fancy halachic way, which is beyond the scope of this talk, how exactly he understands that you become bound to the Shavua, but that's what he holds. So therefore, don't shake hand, don't swear to people when they tell you private information. It may come handy in future. So that's important to note, that even if you've promised someone to secrecy, still halacha overrides that if it's going to really change someone's life and make someone's life miserable, or make them lose their life, their health, their sanity, or their money. That's something that's important, and you have to keep it in mind. Now, whether or not a person could exaggerate is another one of Chafetz Chaim's 7 conditions. He says you can't exaggerate. You could say whatever it is exactly, but you can't exaggerate it. Once you get at it, especially if you know the person and you have had negative private instances with him that you are upset at, you can't just pour out all of your emotion. You have to be very logical and stick to the information in a way that could benefit the other person. Now, however, I want to make a caveat here. The Chafetz Chaim says there's certain points of time, some cases that you could even exaggerate. For instance, a teacher or a father, that your student or your son wants to marry someone, or wants to get into friendship with someone that you know that the person is a horrible influence. But he doesn't know. He's a teenager. He's not going to understand. If you try even to explain to him the reasons, he is not going to understand the reasons necessarily. His friendship and dedication to a friend is much more important to him than your advice. So it's going to go over his head. Says the Chafetz Chaim, you could exaggerate. You could say things that are blown out of proportion. Whether or not you could make up lies, he does not say, although really the same logic should apply to making up information. But that's one area, that's an anecdote, that's a yotzei min haklah, it's an exception to the regular rule. Regularly speaking, you should not and you cannot exaggerate. But in those types of scenarios, when you know the person deliberately is ruining his life, and is your son that doesn't listen to a father normally, because in teenage years they usually psychologically they prefer friends over parents. So in those cases you could even exaggerate in order to accomplish something that is important for their life. Now, what is considered a blemish? You say shidduchim, if it's a blemish you have to say. What's considered mum? What's considered blemish? The rule of thumb is anything that objectively is a flaw in a marriage relationship, objectively, again, that no one would want such a husband or such a wife, you must disclose even if you were not approached and asked. You're obligated to go find the person's number, call them up and say, I just want you to know, I know this firsthand, and this is true, this person, they have this issue. So, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Now, the things that are not objective, in Hebrew they say tam v'reach en litvakeach. Certain things is a matter of taste. Someone is beautiful. Someone had a nose job done. Someone had those things are not none of our business to mention. And again, certain things that are subjective, you may think that are bad, but other people may think it's beautiful and good. So those things, if you're not asked specifically, you're not allowed to disclose. How about if you were asked explicitly? If someone comes and says, I want to know if this boy has ever gotten angry in his life. Right? Well, normal people do get angry here and there. Sometimes with certain a spectrum of normal anger, so to speak. Although Rambam writes that anger is, none of it is good, and so on and so forth. Gava is none of it good. But normal thing that people have, you would not disclose normally. But if someone explicitly asks you, says, I want to know if this person has ever gotten angry, you must say whatever you know. If it says, has he missed a minyan ever in his life? So normal people, sometimes they miss minyan, they slip in, they oversleep, and so on and so forth. They don't go to minyan once in a year, twice in a year. Chas v'shalom, right? But it happens. So if you're asked explicitly, say, I'm very makpid, I'm very particular in this, I want to know. You can't lie to him. Even if he is not a rational person and is asking a non-rational question. For instance, he asks, is this person the biggest Talmid Chacham or the biggest Tzaddik in the community? So you know the family. You say, you don't deserve the biggest Tzaddik or Talmid Chacham. For you, this is the biggest Tzaddik. Yes, he is. You can't do that. Although there's a sefer that writes that a person could do that, when you know that for them this is good, I don't believe that's a fair thing. It's lying when you were put on point to tell them about that very specific thing. That's not fair. You would have to disclose the emet if they ask specifically about that issue. Now, asking about the general profile, although general profile is not objective, any time that you give a general profile about anyone, you're being subjective, but something that's basic, to give a basic structure of a picture of this personality, is mutar, because without the general profile you can't even approach the shidduch or the business deal or whatever it is that you're doing. So general profile, staying away from sticky things, is mutar, even if you have to disclose some negative things that are subjective. You can say, look, to me it seems like she may be a little lazy, or if it's if something that's of that nature. But aside from that, you have to stick to the general rules and regulations. Now, if someone cannot tolerate regular life pressures and stress of life, they just break. They can't tolerate pressure. Rabbi Yashiv says that's objectively something negative. No one could live a normal life with someone that can't take normal level of stress. So says Rabbi Yashiv, you could disclose that and say this person does not do good under pressure, under stress. They break very easily. So therefore, that's something important. Now, Steipler Gaon writes, this is the father of Reb Chaim Kanievsky Shlita, Rabbi Yaakov Yisrael Kanievsky. He said that if a person had schizophrenia, for instance, and this is, again, as strange as you may think this is, these are, the physicians deal with this, who experience schizophrenia, they go crazy basically, or they become depressed, clinically depressed. So he says if a person has been clean from it for 4 years, he had schizophrenia or depression, and then he was healed from it, and for 4 years he's been clean, you don't have to mention it.
How many years?
4 years. He says you don't have to mention it. Rabbi Yashiv, Alav Shalom, he disagreed with this, and I believe that really is the normative halacha. Rabbi Yashiv says even if someone has been clean from schizophrenia, mental diseases of any sort, there's a very big chance that this could come back, either in themselves, or the tendency is sometimes genetically is transferred to the next generation, and that's something that the fellow deserves to know. Doesn't mean that they're going to break the shidduch, but they at least deserve to be aware of the fact that there's a history, especially if there's another fellow in their family with depression or with schizophrenia. That's something important that the person has to know. Now, Rav Moshe Sternbach, he is the head of the Edah Haredit in Eretz Israel, Shlita. In Chelek Bet, Siman Tafresh Pei Daled, I think, in his sefer, Teshuvot V'Anagot, he was asked also this question, and he basically takes the same route as Rabbi Yashiv, but he explains it much better. He says, if it was something that the professionals, the psychiatric doctor or the psychologists, they tell you this came for a specific reason. It does not show any pattern in their psycho, in their psychological patterns or genetics. This was a one-time thing that came for whatever reason, stress or pressure that they were experiencing during that course of lifetime, and is not going to, guaranteed not going to come back. Says you don't have to disclose it. But nevertheless, he has the extra caveat. He says even so, for girls is more important to be disclosed than for boys, because girls, their life is much more of a emotional roller coaster. They give birth, they go on postpartum depression, they have mood swings and hormonal changes and so on and so forth. Therefore, he says it's more important to discuss this with a competent Rav, then it's about a girl, than about a boy that, he had a setback, a major setback in his finances, and he was depressed for a month. So therefore, that's, again, the reason I'm saying this is not to give clear guidelines, although I'm trying to be as clear as possible to give the main guidelines of halacha. But the point of this is not to pass in halacha l'maaseh. The point of this is to show you that even amongst the Gedolei Torah, even amongst the greatest of the poskim, there are debates about the details of this, and depending on the case, depending on the person and the family and the scenario and the time and all of that, you would get a Shelat Chacham. You would discuss it with a competent Moreh Ora'ah to know what really a person should do. For instance, Dayan Weiss, Rabbi Yitzchak Weiss in Minchad Yitzchak, he says if a person has done a horrible avera, very big avera, one time in his lifetime, right? And now, of course, he's not doing that. He's did teshuvah, whatever it is. Should he disclose this to the kala or to the chatan? He says if it was a one-time thing and he's never gotten back to it, you don't have to disclose it. You don't have to say it at all. Obviously, he's not talking about someone that has had addiction to, let's say, pornography or smoking things that are addictive and so on and so forth. Those people who are on a regular 12-step program and so on and so forth, that's a much more severe thing that could come back and could swing back, and therefore may have to be disclosed. But a one-time avera that they did, even if it's a very big avera, says Dayan Weiss, you don't have to disclose that to your chatan or kala. On the other hand, Rav Moshe Feinstein writes in Igrot Moshe, I believe Chelek Bet Simon Kuf Lamed Vav, he writes, he's writing to a lady that was, she was in a dormitory of a college and not religious at all, with all the 9 yards of things that go in living on campus and so on and so forth. And she had succumbed to temptation of promiscuity and so on. And she asked Rav Moshe, said, I'm now fully religious and I'm planning to get married. Do I have to say this to my chatan? Says Rav Moshe Feinstein, you absolutely have to. But, says Reb Moshe, you have to say the first, second, third date. When he gets to see the beauty that you have and the midot and the personality and what you have to offer, and he wants to marry you, then you could say, look, one day I drank whatever it is, and under the circumstance I succumbed to the Yetzer Hara, and something happened which I wholeheartedly regret, and so on and so forth. It's never going to happen. If he knows a guarantee that it's never going to happen again, and it's not a pattern and so on, obviously it's not going to break the shidduch for that. But it says, nevertheless, it's not fair to not disclose such a big thing to your hatan. So again, you have a discrepancy between Rav Moshe Feinstein and, on the other hand, Dayan Weiss. Marsham in Chelek Hey, in the 5th volume of his Teshuvot, he also writes you don't have to say it, like the Dayan Weiss, like Minchad Yitzchak. But nevertheless, these are big debates within the poskim, and these are things that a person really needs to ask for guidance. Now, even if you have something that's not a mum gamur, is not objectively wrong, but you're the shadchan, you are calling the shidduch, you're introducing them together, the halacha is you have to be much more open. Why? Because here is not that you're objecting to a suggestion of someone else, you are implying that this is a great idea for you. And if it's not a real great idea, then you would have to even disclose more details than a regular case, which again, the details of it we're not going to discuss tonight. It's beyond the scope of this talk, but I'm just setting off an alarm for us to be aware of it and to ask more questions. Now, if someone did not care to ask questions, someone absolutely is not doing any research, deliberately, right? Chafetz Chaim, you don't have to tell them anything, because they're deliberately destroying themselves. If someone doesn't care to even go ask when they're making such life decisions, such big thing, you don't have to necessarily tell them. That's one important exception to the rule. The second, perhaps even more important, is there are some people who are the yenta of the town, so to speak. They are the Lashon Harah agency of the town. Before you hang up the phone with them, telling them something, you hear it back from 60 places. To those people, says the Chafetz Chaim, you don't have to say anything. If they are Ba'alei Lashon Harah, they're not going to keep it. You're going to say a secret to them that only few people knew, and they're going to go and it's going to get back to you and harm your own life. Says Chafetz Chaim, you don't have to say it to them. If they're Ba'alei Lashon Harah, if they're people who are not honest people, they're not people who are going to keep the information just for their own benefit and keep their mouth quiet, then you don't have to offer the information. Now, also, if you have doubt, you're patur from saying it. Let's say you don't know. You're not sure if this Lashon Harah that you want to say applies to this case, or you don't even know fully if it's true. You're mesupak, you're doubtful. The halacha is, you don't have to say it. You're not mechuyav to offer information that you're not even sure about and go say, maybe I heard, maybe he has a machala, right? That's not something that a person needs to really say. Now, it's important to know that if a person did do research, but no one told them anything, then you would have to really disclose and say it. It's a personal story that someone that was not even doing financially well, and he had saved up a large sum of money, $50,000, $100,000, to support his future son-in-law as a scholarship to get a degree in whether it was in Torah, whatever it was. And he researched on it. He said, I want a son-in-law that is capable of doing this. I want the best. And people, the professors, the Rosh Yeshiva, whatever it was, they told him, yeah, he is. And right after the marriage, he was so disappointed. He was venting to a friend of his. He said, I was gypped, basically. He said, I asked questions and people lied to me. The boy doesn't have midot, he's not a pleasant person, he doesn't have a good mind, he's lazy, he's not learning, and so on and so forth. So that's a horrible story. But on the other hand, sometimes when you're careful about these issues, you see the fruits of it in a glorified way. It's a story with the Chazon Ish. There was a divorce that happened in the Bedin in Eretz Israel, and one of the Dayanim, a year later, was approached to offer information about the man. Now, this was a big conflict for him because he was a dayan on the bedin when they got divorced, and he knew that the reason that she asked for a divorce, the previous wife, was because she said he cannot, based on medical evidence and so on, he cannot ever have kids. And obviously, if he's marrying this young woman now, she doesn't know about that. So do I have to say that? So he asked Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish said, you cannot say exactly the reason because you don't know if they had done the research, the medical evidence was 100%, not 100%. You don't know. So you can't say it with the reason attached to it, but you could say, if it was my daughter, I would not give it to him. That much you could say. And that's what he did. He felt very good. Says, okay, they're never going to get married. Good. To the shock of his life, 6 months later, he hears that they got married. Okay? So he says, I did my part. I listened to Chazon Ish. I asked the question. And to even a bigger shock of his life, a year later, he hears that they had a baby boy. So he comes running to the Chazon Ish. He says, look, what happened? And Chazon Ish says, you see, this is the genius of the Torah. You have to say, he says, look what would have happened. If you didn't say anything, then for this year and a half, your conscience would not let you sleep at night. He said, I deliberately ruined someone's life. But if you would say the reason without really knowing 100% that the reason medically is true, look at what would come out of it. You would have ruined someone's life that actually could have kids. So this is really the balance, the delicate balance of like many things in life. This takes a real delicate balance to know when to speak up, how to speak up, and how much to disclose is something that we have to educate ourselves in that manner, in a serious way. Now, another topic that I want to just touch on at least is the doctors, the medical information, right? Obviously, doctors are sworn into privacy of people by law. If they have a breach of privacy, they could lose their license, right? Now, halachically, if you are a physician and you know someone has a problem, can you disclose that to the shidduch or whatever else it is that needs to know the information. Now, Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, alav hashalom, he was asked a question. Someone was trying to get a eye exam. They needed it for driver's license and for other things. To get something done, they needed to have a perfect eyesight, and they didn't. They barely could see. So he asked this doctor. He said, "I want to get this document, but I'm never going to drive. I'm not going to put anyone in danger. Promise." So he asked Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, and the sister Eliezer writes, "You absolutely cannot do that. You have to disclose the information, because what if you don't know? If he's going to not listen to his promise and not do what he said, you're endangering the community. So despite the fact that he's promising, because you can't assure that he's going to actually do that, you have to disclose it." Now, the sad story is discussed in the book of Rabbi Yaakov Mordechai Breish in Chalkat Yaakov in Chelek Bet. He writes, he was asked by a doctor that some young boy, Chatan, got engaged to a girl, and the only person in the world that knew that this boy is going to only live a year or two, Rahman al-Islam, was this doctor. He had a specific type of cancer, he was diagnosed, and this was before the doctor disclosed it even to the boy himself. And he asked the question, what do I do? Do I say it? Do I not say it? And he goes through a very fancy halachic work to prove that you are indeed obligated to say this to her family and save them from getting married to a case that they could have two kids and then they're going to be yatomim, the kids are going to be orphans, and she's going to be almana. He says you have to say it. And the Betzin Rav, Moshe Stern, he may disagree with some of the fancy halachic work that he did, but he also, halacha l'maaseh, he agrees with him that in those types of cases you have to say it. Now, what's the extent that you have to go to disclose? You're the only person that knows. If you disclose it, they're going to sue you and you're going to lose your license. You can't work anymore as a physician. Are you still obligated to say it? So Chafetz Chaim has a chidush in his sefer Ahavat Chesed, not in Shmirat HaLashon, in Ahavat Chesed. He says, based on the Gemara in Ba Metzia, there's a machloket there between Ben Petura and Rabbi Akiva. You have two people who are going in the desert. They're lost, but now they found their way. There's another way worth of desert way without water. They have a little jar of water left. They have two choices. They could either divide it to half, each one will drink half, and both will die before they get to the destiny. Or the one that owns the jar will keep it to himself. He will watch his friend die in front of his eyes, but he will survive and he'll get to the settlement. So the Ben Petura says, Chas v'shalom, you can't see your brother die. You have to divide it, and al yir'eh b'mot chaviro. You should not watch your brother die. Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. Rabbi Akiva disagreed with him. He said, no, the Torah says v'chai b'hem. You have to live with the mitzvot. You can't kill yourself. Chayecha kodmin. Your life takes precedence to his life. So Chafetz Chaim says that's only, and halacha is like Rabbi Akiva. You keep the water, you drink the water, he dies, unfortunate, but you live. That's the halacha. Says Chafetz Chaim, that's only if your life is in danger. But if there's no life-threatening situation, then you cannot do that. You have to give everything that you have, if it's a matter of money, in order to save someone's life. Now this is a very big question, because as theoretical and hypothetical that you may think it is, imagine this: you have $50,000 saved up in your bank accounts, your life saving, and then someone needs a kidney transplant and needs $50,000 to live. Are you obligated to withdraw the money, give it to them? A Jew lives because of you. Are you obligated halachically to give up all of your life savings for saving a Jewish life? According to Chafetz Chaim, it would seem like you should. But Rabbi Elyashiv disagrees with this, and he says the following. It says Rabbi Elyashiv that a person is not obligated to give more than a fifth of their mitzvah of lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. Now, this is not so simple, because normally speaking, for a lo ta'aseh, For a don't do, if I tell you, either I take everything that you have away from you, or you have to do Chilul Shabbat, or you should eat tarif. You have to give everything that you have and not do a Isur of the Torah. Everything you have, every last penny. But here, you're not doing anything. You're just sitting idly by, not saying Lashon Harah, or not giving your $50,000 life saving to save a life. Says Rabbi Yashiv, in this case, it's like a mitzvah aseh. You're not obligated to spend more than a fifth of your assets on this type of a mitzvah. So therefore, coming back to our physician thing, if he's going to really lose his license, then and he can't work anymore, then he's perhaps not obligated to do it. But nevertheless, in most cases, there is always an indirect way that they could find to relay the information in a way that would result to the same thing. Now, we haven't spoken really about the internet age. That's a whole other talk, B'ezrat Hashem, that we should have, in writing Yelp reviews, reading Yelp reviews, or ratemyprofessor.com, right, which the students use all the time, and book reports, and restaurant reports, and professional reports, all those things. Or how do you deal with an attack on yourself? If on social media someone attacked you and said Lashon Harah on you, is it mutar for you to retaliate and not attack back necessarily, but to clarify, even using Lashon Harah on him in order to clarify your own position? Those are things that really need further discussion. There's a Yerushalmi in Masechet Pe'ah Perek Aleph Halacha Aleph that says mutar lesaper Lashon Harah al baalei machloket. If someone is making a machloket and making a fight and is, destroying your image in the community by saying Lashon Harah, oftentimes it's mutar to say Lashon Harah on them and so on. But again, the details of those and the reviews on internet and social media remains, B'ezrat Hashem, for a subsequent shiur. Thank you for listening.